All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. That was a lovely introduction. I don't think I've ever been called a must-have, so that's definitely in the bucket list now. So first of all, I would like to thank ZeMKI for the invitation and congratulate you, not just on the birthday, which is nice, but also on being such an outward-looking and forward-looking institution. You know, we're at the time when a lot of institutions are frankly failing us, and some academic institutions as well, and it's very heartwarming to see an institution that is thriving and also doing good. So congratulations, and to the next 20 or 200 years, perhaps. Today I have a story to tell. Hopefully it will add up to a story or some sort of a story. And I think about it in 4 acts. First, I'll look back a little bit at digital media and democracy over the past 20 years, which is the theme of the conference. I'll talk about the difficulties and challenges of democracy in the digital age. I will present some visions of the digital citizen. Sorry, they evolved from 6 to 8, so there will be 2 more to the ones that I submitted in the abstract a few months ago. You know, some people changed their titles. I changed a few of the ideal types, but the basic story is still there. And finally, we'll conclude with some reflections on the present and potentially the future of and the risks of hollowing out the fabric of our democracy. So let's dig in. Digital media and democracy in the past 20 years. Small topic, of course. I'll exhaust it in 5 minutes and then we can move on. My first academic job was in 2005. So my academic career is as old as ZeMKI. There's an overlap there, a commonality, if you will. So when I start my courses in digital media and democracy at the University of Edinburgh, I look back and think I try to get students through a journey. You know, digital media used to be called new media when I started my career, and now, of course, they are the media. In the past 20 years and more, we've seen an explosion of the amount of people that are online. When I started my research, I would always have to start, especially when I was doing studies of Italy, I would always have to premise my studies by saying, well, only 25% of people are online, but this will grow in the future. Well, this has definitely grown worldwide to a very, very high scale. But it's not just the internet now, it's mainly social media that a lot of people use. And for a lot of people, as we know, social media are pretty much the internet, perhaps with some messaging on the side. Very importantly, we are now living in a mobile internet, in an internet that is on our phones, and that has changed a lot of the ways in which the internet works, or at least the ways in which people use the internet compared to when I started doing research on the internet. It was mainly computers where people were sitting down, looking at their screen in a focused way without a lot of distractions, whereas now, of course, people are walking on the street with their phone and bumping into each other while they're maybe texting each other. In 2006, Time magazine famously had its Person of the Year cover story at the end of the year, which is a tradition they started at the start of the previous century. And in 2006, the story was that the Person of the Year was you. And the you pretty much looked like the interface for YouTube. And the idea was we are living in an age of empowerment where people control the information they want, where people have power, where information enhances their agency. A couple of years later, we have Barack Obama's first historic election, the first internet candidate, the first candidate that really understood how to use the internet, not only to push his message, but to create a movement, to enable people to participate and to connect with each other. 2011, of course, we have the Arab Spring, or so-called Arab Spring, and Time magazine thinks is the protester who is the Person of the Year. And again, there's a lot of debate, even to this day, about the role of digital media in those uprisings. I tend to side with the more skeptical side of the debate, but it is true that at least in public imaginaries, especially in the West, Facebook and other social media were identified as catalysts for that protest. The next decade was not as good. In 2016, it was Donald Trump. In 2021 was Elon Musk, who would then go on and buy our formerly beloved, for some of us at least, Twitter, and turn it into shit. And in 2024 is Donald Trump again. Less perhaps hopeful messages from these Person of the Year decisions. More systematically, a very recent report by VDEM, which is a large consortium that tries to measure features of democracy and the health of democratic governance, showed us that in 2004, 49% of the world population lived in autocracies and 51% lived in democracies. So democracy was still winning, even though by just a very tiny margin. But by 2024, the percentages have completely changed. And now almost 3/4 of the world population live in countries that these experts classify as autocracy, which, as you can imagine, now also includes the United States of America. So democracy is clearly struggling. I think in this room, we all care for democracy. We all agree that with all its flaws, it's the best possible system, and it's a system that needs to be saved and preserved and strengthened. It seems that, at least from a certain perspective, the internet hasn't really helped. That all those hopes we had, all those ideas about empowerment, engagement, knowledge, information sharing, connecting, have now given way to disinformation, hate speech, trolling, polarization, and a host of other, and a syndrome of other democratic dysfunctions that the internet might, at least in part, have contributed to. So that's for the first part of my story. The second part is that democracy is hard. This picture here is the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was, in Greek mythology, a person who had tricked the gods twice. He had faked his death twice to not be sent to hell by the gods. Once the gods found out, they got really upset, so they decided to trick him with the task of pushing a rock up a mountain. And they told him, if you push the rock up to the top of the mountain, you'll go to heaven. But the trick was that the rock would always fall when Sisyphus would get closer to the top, and so he would always have to start over in hope of getting up to that top. And to some degree, that's the story of democracy. Democracy is not a system that we can ever fully realize. The ideals that motivate the democratic enterprise have never been fully reconciled with how democracy works. Giovanni Sartori, one of, in my opinion, the most important theorists of representative liberal democracy, talks about how what democracy is cannot be separated from what democracy should be. We believe in democracy not because it realizes those objectives, those values that are enshrined in our constitutions or in the values of people who wrote about democracy, but because we aspire to those values and we strive getting closer, hopefully every day. And when the rock falls back to the bottom of the mountain, Democrats pick it up and push it up again, even though we know that the rock will probably fall again at some point, and we'll have to pick it up again and pick ourselves up again and move on. So in tech parlance, this is not a bug, it's a feature. Democracy aims to peacefully govern complex societies made of interdependent people and groups with massively diverging values and interests. Now try achieving that at the mass scale of contemporary democracies where we're dealing with 50 million, 100 million, 1 billion people if you think about India, with all those ideas, interests, identities, and cultures to reconcile. It's an incredibly difficult task, and it's a task where we're never going to see the end, we're never going to achieve the ideal, but we always strive. And the point is, are we striving? Are we moving in the right direction? Now, I'm a political communication scholar, guilty as charged, and so my interest is in how politicians and citizens interact and communicate and talk to each other or not talk to each other. And so the way in which I see the digital challenges to democracy in the present era is that we've gone from a system where there was some ground rules and some gatekeeping and some filtering enforced by news media professionals. Now, those news media professionals were not perfect. A lot of them looked like me, or older version than me, i.e. they were educated white males. They had very limited views of the world. They had interests, they had preferences, but they had views of what was appropriate to say in a public sphere, if I may use that term in Germany, and what was not appropriate. The famous New York Times byline, all the news that's fit to print. There were things that if a politician would say them, would not get reported or would get heavily criticized and not amplified. And politicians knew that, and they knew better than to cross certain lines. And with all their flaws, with all the differences, I'm a comparativist, so I know that different media systems operate differently with different logics. Even different sectors of the media system operate differently. You wouldn't expect to read the same kinds of news in the Bild or in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. But there is a sense in the journalistic profession that there are some public obligations, some democratic responsibilities. What Thomas Hanisch and colleagues in their large comparative project on journalism in the world call monitorial journalism. Journalism whose job is to scrutinize power, to make sure that citizens are aware at least of the big issues of the day, and that politicians do not get off the hook if they violate norms, if they do a terrible job. However, in the digital era, we have seen a massive reshuffling of these cards. Platform power has redistributed media power, and professional media elites' role has been weakened. They're not as important anymore. They're not as profitable anymore. There's fewer journalists working in newsrooms now than there were a decade or 2 decades ago. And instead, we have seen a rise of platform companies and tech companies, alternative media outlets, influencers. And because all of these actors do not have the same professional filters to how they scrutinize and gatekeep what people say in public discourse, politicians' power has also increased. This slide originally had the picture that was in Professor Van Dijk's keynote this morning with the tech bros, and I thought I would change that with Mark Zuckerberg telling us after Trump's re-election that, content moderation is so outdated. We're for free speech, so let's get rid of fact-checking. Let's send content moderation down the drain. And of course, his tech bro, Elon Musk, is a little less subdued in his public speaking, so he doesn't have problems being seen with a chainsaw next to Argentina's newly elected president. The point is, platform elites who have a lot of power these days on how we communicate and what information we see do not have the same level of democratic responsibilities that professional news journalists, with all the imperfections of professional journalism, abide by and are socialized around. So political elites have realized they have a free lunch and a free dinner. They can just say whatever they want unfiltered. In the old days, there was some threat of backfire, of deprioritizing some moderation, but the platforms, partly because of their American-born First Amendment absolutism, were always very hands-off when it came to politician speech, sometimes for good reasons. But the point is, politicians can say whatever they want, essentially. And as a result, with a little bit of time, they realized that things that used to be unacceptable or even unthinkable in politics in the late phases of the previous century has become the new normal. Insulting, scapegoating, depicting minorities in racist and intolerant ways has become the tools of the trade. And mainstream politicians have struggled to catch up with this trend because they were socialized in a different kind of environment where certain things could just not be said and not even alluded to. And so outsiders have thrived, and of course Donald Trump is an excellent example of that, because they're not bound by the old rules of the game. They only know the new rules of the game, and they can play them pretty well. And this has led to what I call here provisionally democratically dysfunctional political elite communication. There's plenty of examples, so this is an example slide. Of course, the German AfD, which you all know too well here in this country, has provided plenty. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, pretending to shoot a gun at his opponents during a mass rally during the 2002 campaign. Of course, his political twin, Milei, in Argentina with the chainsaw, so he'd rather not shoot rifles, he prefers the chainsaw. Of course, in Britain, we have the pleasure of Nigel Farage wrecking the country and spreading racist speech and blaming the police for racist riots last summer. In Romania, they canceled a whole election because of fears of outside interference. We have, of course, the French far right, which is inching closer and closer to power, often on the heels of very racist speech, although Marine Le Pen modernized her image and her strategy compared to her father, but in a way making it even more effective for the digital age. Conspiracy theories and election fraud conspiracies thrive in a lot of countries when an election doesn't go the way the far right would have hoped it to go. And of course, as a good Italian, I cannot deprive you of an example from our current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. This is a screenshot from a TikTok video that she took on election day, where in Italy, the law says you cannot campaign. So she thought that a way to go around the law would be to just say, get two melons, put them in front of her breasts. Her last name is Meloni. Melons in Italian is a sexualized term for breasts. And she had this video where she looks at us in this very alluring way, and she just said, remember, melons. So that's another form of democratically dysfunctional elite communication right there. So what does that mean for democracy? These behaviors that are democratically unconstrained and unfiltered, and the public discourse around their prevalence and their effectiveness contribute to what my former colleague Andy Chadwick and friend and co-author calls a culture of indeterminacy, where you don't know what is true and what is not, anything goes. Another friend and colleague of mine, Dave Karpf, talks about how the idea of the prevalence of disinformation weakens the democratic myth of the attentive public. Politicians' behaviors are checked by the idea that some of the public is attentive and they can catch them when they straddle, when they fail us. But if politicians believe they can make enough people, they can fool enough people enough of the time, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, then they won't behave in ways that are more constrained. It undermines the assumption of good faith behavior by elites and activists. This was a very strong condition of the early days of the internet, where people, there has always been deception, there's always been impersonation and manipulation, but there was a general assumption that if you went and talked to people online, people would tell you what they thought, people would tell you who they were, and those assumptions have been undermined. And finally, it has enabled elites to double down on falsehoods, manipulation, and inaccuracies through what Schaefer and Schaefer called the liar's dividend. The idea that if people believe that there is a lot of lies out there, then a politician who is called out for a lie can just say, well, but that's a lie too, and then it's a draw, and the game goes on, and you're still winning. So these are all ways in which the current digital transformations, together with elites' behavior that are often, understandably self-interested but democratically reckless, are weakening democracy, in my opinion. I now move on to visions of the digital citizen. There's 8 of them rather than 6, and I will briefly go through each of them. Now, before I begin, some caveats here. These are not mutually exclusive categories. People can inhabit multiple spaces, perhaps in different moments of their life or even in different parts of their day. These are also not quantitative estimates. This is essentially my own reading of 20 years of literature to which I have contributed myself on digital media citizenship and participation. And this is also probably not exhaustive. Witness the fact that in the short span of a few months, I myself thought that 6 were not enough and we needed 8. So you might have ideas of other visions that we could include. I'm using the word vision here in a very expansive way. I was inspired by the title of the conference when I was invited to give this keynote, and I thought, okay, the conference is about visions. Let's talk about visions that relate to my own expertise and research and passions. So partly this is about what research shows us that is happening, but partly it's also about how we as researchers and as members of society engage with the question of digital media and citizenship, okay? So the simplest, the most obvious one, the one to which my own research has contributed the most is this idea of the empowered citizen, the you in the 2006 Time Magazine Persons of the Year front page. Digital tools clearly can be and are used for political learning, for political self-expression, for networking, for mobilization, for participation. There is a long and perhaps tedious debate in the literature whether it's the people that are already engaged that use the internet to engage even more. That's the idea of reinforcement. And there's the idea that in some instances, digital media actually can help motivate or at least present opportunities to citizens to become more engaged, and that's mobilization. I mainly subscribe to the second set of ideas. My own book with Augusto Valeriani talks about how certain political expressions on social media are associated with increases in political participation, and importantly, this is especially the case among people with lower levels of interest and lower levels of attention to politics and campaigns, right? So the idea is that the less engaged, if they encounter politics on social media, which they encounter fairly regularly, can become more engaged. But that's one vision, right? And as a way, by way of self-criticism, the visions we have also inform the research we do, especially if you, like me, are more in the quantitative positivist paradigm, where you have hypotheses, you test them, and then you either find support or you don't find support, but you don't test everything else that you could have been tested. You don't test different visions that are equally as plausible. A vision that has emerged over the past few years, and this has a long history, the old debate about slacktivism with Evgeny Morozov's work, but more recently in the US, Eitan Hirsch has talked about the idea of the citizen hobbyist. This is somebody who is well-informed, who expresses himself a lot, who uses a lot of social media, gets very morally outraged by how bad things are, enjoys the drama and gamesmanship by politicians, is always following the latest moves. So they score really, really high on all the political information, political knowledge scales. They do a lot of keyboard activism. They participate a lot online. Maybe they participate offline as well. This person here, this picture was famous a few years ago. This was during I think a big economic meeting in Hamburg here in Germany, and one of the protesters took a selfie of himself while there was some debris on fire on the back. And the idea here is there's a lot of virtue signaling. There's a lot of self-expression, which a lot of research tells us is a good thing for participation. However, according to this vision, this engagement with distant politics, with politics that is ideological and idealistic, overlooks local connection. It overlooks community building. It overlooks building trust with other people. So you spend all your time arguing with strangers on Twitter about the virtues of your position, and you don't help your neighbor, or you don't exercise actual power in the conditions in which you can exercise it, which is not changing a stranger's mind on social media. That's a vision. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's a vision. There's the quantified citizen. A lot of us engage in a lot of low information activities on social media. We do that because the platforms nudge us to do more and more of that, partly because they want to surveil us, extract data from our digital labor, and use that data to target us or to sell it to people who want to target us. It's unclear how much of these activities and of these tools are effective in politics. People who study data-driven campaigning and micro-targeting so far have come up with rather mixed conclusions about their power and effectiveness. There is this chart at the back, was a study done by a group supporting the Biden campaign in 2020, and they found that when they had advertisements that elicited a lot of ha-ha reactions, those advertisements were actually quite effective. And they were surprised by this because they thought, well, if people are laughing, they're not angry. They're not those hobbyists that get upset and share the ad. But apparently that worked better than when people reacted with the angry emoji. One important point is, and this will come back a few times, and obviously was key to the keynote this morning, is lack of platform transparency about what's going on with these tools and these techniques means that there is a societal concern for these techniques, and obviously because they don't give us data to do research on these phenomena, very little knowledge of what happens on the ground. But there is this idea, this vision of the citizen as somebody whose life is quantified, and through that data, their behavior can be altered. There is the subversive citizen. This is a tribute to Thorsten's quant idea of dark participation. The idea that, again, people can be very engaged. They can score very high on a lot of survey measures or digital trace data measures of how much they post about politics, and they can be very engaged. However, they can be engaged for the wrong reasons. They might be spreading misinformation, they might be trolling, they might resorting to hate speech, to annihilate opponents, to make life hard for people they disagree with. So these are people who have a lot of skin in the game, who spend a lot of time participating in politics, but their democratic motivations are not great. And as a result, because of these democratically problematic values, they end up harming other people or potentially harming other people. One of my favorite studies of the past few years is a study by Sebastián Valenzuela and colleagues who show that the more people get their news on social media, the more they participate, good, but also the more they spread misinformation, bad, right? So the subversive citizen, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is somebody who has a lot of the features of the good citizen that a lot of people talk about, but they don't use them for good. And the counterpart to this is the manipulated citizen. This is somebody, and again, all of us who have written about misinformation, myself included, are somewhat guilty of painting this picture of people being almost inevitably vulnerable to disinformation, micro-targeting, algorithmic filtering, resulting in distorted beliefs, distorted attitudes, distorted behaviors. And some people view these citizens as passive, as disengaged. They are the people that don't know a lot about politics. But actually, some research tells us that it's the politically more involved people who are more likely to also be manipulated. We know that they are the ones that are more likely to be targeted by political ads. Political campaigners want to put their money in places that reach people that will pay attention, and those are politically interested people. They are more likely to be shown political content on social media, of course, because of the algorithm, and they are more likely to believe in falsehoods as long as they support their viewpoints, motivated reasoning and all those literatures. So the manipulated citizen is often not so much somebody who is aloof from politics and just has a little information and that information happens to be false. They're actually somebody who is very involved in politics. So again, there's an ambivalence that I hope is emerging through these vignettes, if you will, between features of democratic engagement that are on paper desirable and features that actually are not. Then, and this is a new entry to my typology, we have the accidental citizen. These are people who stumble upon political content. They are online for other reasons. They might be reached by advertising. They might see content because their friends posted it. They might see political content because a celebrity they follow decides to intervene in some public debate. Here, the concept of curated flows by Thorson and Wells is extremely important. It is true, as Anna Sofia Kumpel has told us, that there is a Matthews law that applies here. So the more involved in politics you are, the more likely it is that you will encounter politics online by accident. But it's also true that a lot of people do encounter at least some political information by accident. The problem is, what does that do? Is that something that is really beneficial to them, or is it something that falls by the wayside? In some of my research, I did argue that it is beneficial for their participation. But then there is another figure that is a little more proactive in how they avoid politics, and that's what I call the distractive citizen. Somebody who filters out news and political content from their feeds. And another thing to say is that the social media that I began studying in the early 2010s is no longer the social media we have today. Today, TikTok, Instagram Reels, these are basically personalized, algorithmically driven mini televisions that we carry with us. And so the extent to which our choices influence the content we see has completely changed compared to when you choose who to follow on Twitter or who to friend on Facebook. The people, we know from decades of research in political science that most people only care about politics a little bit, don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about politics, don't want to get a lot of political news, have a lot of other things to do in their lives. And a lot of people prefer entertainment. And as Marcus Pryor told us a long time ago now, people with preferences for entertainment in a high choice media environment will get a lot more entertainment and a lot less news compared to the broadcast era. Interestingly enough, there is the phenomenon of news find me, where people think, I don't need to be an active citizen. I don't need to actively seek out news. News will find me, which does happen in digital media spaces, but it also doesn't lead to a lot of political learning. So yes, you will encounter some news, but you will not learn what the contents are and the knowledge that you can derive from that news. Also, there is an emerging research agenda to which I hope I will contribute in the future that shows that people avoid news simply to protect their well-being. There's just too much. Doom scrolling is very engaging. It's also terrible for you, and people rationally, some people at least, rationally avoid it. And in spite of the fact, and this is going to be one of the points that I hope will stick with you today, in spite of the fact there has been a recent surge in interest in news avoidance, most political research, most political science and political communication research on digital politics has focused on the activists, has focused on the hyper participants. We've collected their tweets, we've tried to figure out if they engaged with people that disagree with them or not, we've tried to understand how they talk. We haven't studied those who don't tweet, those who don't participate, those who don't even get information. And finally, there is the heroic citizen. And this person, a lot of time it exists in the conclusion sections of our papers, especially mine. You can look up a lot of my papers on disinformation, and sooner or later you'll find a reference to implications for democracy, and one of those implications is, people really need to be careful, and we need a lot of media literacy initiatives, and we need people to call out disinformation on social media. We need people to call out intolerance. We need people to recognize disinformation and to check their sources. And these are all things that we tell people to do. Why? Because the institutions have failed them. Because there is lack of accountability and oversight on the digital platforms, as this morning's keynote clearly enshrined. There is a weakening of professional news organizations, which means the overall information environment is less healthy. And democratically dysfunctional elite communication is one of the results. So we have citizens who are now facing the constant threat and challenge of misinformation, of manipulation, of intolerance, of trolling behaviors, of democratically undesirable behaviors. And so we tell people, look, because institutions have failed us, we cannot fix those institutions yet. We can try, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. So for the time being, people need to be very cautious, very guarded. They need to double check. They need to protect themselves and others in their networks. And this is possible in theory, but it's exhausting. And I came up with this idea because when I was doing an in-depth interview with a member of the public in Britain in 2021, this was part of a multi-method 3-year research project that I contributed to when I was at Loughborough University with Andy Chadwick as the PI. And this was mainly a project focused on WhatsApp and other private messaging apps. But more broadly, it was about how people navigate information and misinformation in the present age. And in talking, I've reported some excerpts of the dialogue with this person. And in talking with this person, she was saying that some of her friends would share conspiracy theories or things that clearly didn't look legitimate. And she gave some examples, and then I probed, isn't that hard to do? Like always having to check, always having to second guess, even when it's your friends who are sharing information on these environments. And she was like, yeah, of course, but I would immediately go and verify and see if it's credible, go and see sources, go and double check. And again, I said, well, isn't that difficult? Doesn't it risk consuming a lot of time? This person is very busy, has a very rich personal and professional life. And she replies, well, but it's what you're meant to do, right? That's what we have to do. You have to do something about, I don't know, to educate yourself. And she mentions Google and how, with Google, everybody think they know everything, but also because Google is there, everybody can check what people think they know. And then I tried to probe a little more and said, but you're a very busy person, you have children, do you really have the time to do all of this? And she's like, well, but if you don't do it, it's like saying I'm not going to cook tonight. I cannot think of not going to check what I hear. You can't really say I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it, and I just find it physiological that I want to go out and check. And then, because I'm Italian and she talks about cooking, I have to probe again. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, it's a great metaphor that is like cooking, but you don't cook every night, do you? I mean, sometimes there is, kids are hungry, the groceries haven't arrived, you're late, your pasta is burned. Some days you just order in or eat some junk food, and that's fine. And again, she's like, no, but if I cannot cook on one, if I cannot check, if I see information and I don't have the time to check, I just hold off having an opinion until I have had the chance to verify or to have a look, at least just have a look. And again, the quantitative social scientist in me is thinking, okay, this is social desirability bias, right? She's telling me these things because I'm a researcher and she doesn't want to look bad. And there's probably something to that end. You never know when you engage in the wonderful, fascinating task of talking to everyday people, to real people, not academics. But I think members of the public is what I should have said. But there's also something true here, I think, about how we have constructed the idea of the good citizen as this person that has to carry all those weights that our institutional failures have put on their shoulders. And we find mechanisms that are problematic in our media environments, and the only solution we have is to tell people that they need to check, that they need to protect themselves and others. And while understandable on our part when we're writing our conclusion sections in our chapters or in our articles or books, it also enshrines this idea of a heroic citizen that I don't think is very sustainable. I think we have all been in the shoes of this person here, but at the same time, I think we would all agree this is not a sustainable thing that we can do on a daily basis with all the information we see. So democracy needs better participation, not simply more of it. And again, I'm guilty as charged of having measured it very often quantitatively and just look at whether there was more. I am coming through to the other side and saying we need better participation. And sometimes more engagement means more biased participation. It means democratically subversive motivations and actions. And as a result, it means the potentially more harm to others in people's online behaviors. So we really need to unpack, and I've tried to do this in these few minutes, the different ways in which we think about participation and the different ways in which people exercise the agency that they can have through digital tools. And because elite and platform accountability has declined over the past few years, good citizens are excessively burdened, and those who want to remain engaged must be increasingly heroic if they are going to enhance rather than undermine democracy, if they're going to protect themselves and others from those potential threats. So finally, a few words on what that means more broadly for democracy. I was just at a panel before this where Axel Bruns gave a wonderful analysis of why echo chambers and filter bubbles are a bad metaphor and empirically useless. I completely agree, and my research contributes to that, I hope. But we do know that there is polarization, and there is polarization between partisan of opposite camps. It's asymmetrical in most cases. It's mostly the right that has become very extreme. The left has not always followed. It is an important feature of contemporary citizenship, for sure, but it's not the most crucial one. In my opinion, the most crucial type of polarization is what I call vertical polarization. So between those who care, those who intensively engage with politics, sometimes with malicious intentions, sometimes even being manipulated themselves, and those who systematically avoid it. And we need to pay more attention to that divide. We need more attention to those who are, I would say, I call them priced out of politics. Politics has become so exhausting. News has become so exhausting. You need to be heroic if you're going to be a good citizen. And a lot of people are not heroes. They might be heroes in their everyday lives, but they cannot be heroes in the political realm. And if both types of polarization coexist and even intensify and are not addressed, we end up with political animosity that is increasing among the minority of political junkies that engage viciously and vehemently every day. And then we have democratic apathy among those that are priced out, that decide that they don't care. And this might lead to a political version of what economists call stagflation. Stagflation is the combination of inflation and lack of growth. Normally, when you have growth, you have inflation. When you don't have growth, inflation goes down. In politics, we might have a combination of increased animosity, increasingly intense and democratic problematic participation among a small group, but also increased apathy and alienation among a larger group. And so I leave you with a question. How do we govern this what I call this hollowed out politics by democratic means? Thank you very much.